Alcaraz than Sinner. He would take Alcaraz all day long.
He wants to take your best punch, know he can handle it. He just rips your heart out. It's like he wants to beat your mom too, right?
Novak Djokovic shocks the tennis world by pulling out of Miami Open after a final defeat to Alcaraz. Novak Djokovic just pulled out of Miami. 650 ranking points gone in a single announcement. The six-time champion who owns this tournament, alongside Andre Agassi in the all-time record books, won't even touch a racket at Hard Rock Stadium this year. Novak Djokovic shocks the tennis world by pulling out of the Miami Open after a final defeat to Alcaraz, and the right shoulder injury cited by organizers on March 15th is only the surface layer of a story that actually began on February 1st in Melbourne. That night, Alcaraz broke his 10-0 Australian Open final record, handed him a fourth consecutive defeat, and pushed his Grand Slam drought past 2 full years. 6 weeks of silence followed. Then Indian Wells put him flat on the court during a 26-shot rally before Draper finished him in a tiebreak. Now clay season becomes his only serious lifeline, and nobody in mainstream tennis is asking why the greatest player in the sport's history is arriving at Roland Garros ranked outside the top 3, physically compromised, with just 2 competitive matches played since February. His Melbourne speech said it plainly: God knows what happens tomorrow, let alone in 6 months. That wasn't humility. Subscribe for the analysis that takes that statement seriously. The full breakdown starts now, and it goes places the official coverage deliberately avoided. March 15th, 2026. 4 words from the ATP Tour's official channels ended the biggest men's tennis storyline of the Sunshine Double before it even began. Novak Djokovic, world number 3, 6-time Miami Open champion, withdrawn, right shoulder injury. The tournament that has defined more chapters of his career than almost any other Masters 1000 event on the calendar will proceed without him. And the draw handed his slot to Jacob Fernley, as if the absence of the most decorated player in the tournament's history was a routine administrative update. It wasn't routine. Nothing about this moment is routine. To understand why, you have to stop accepting the injury narrative as the complete story and start treating it as the final symptom of something that has been building for considerably longer than a week in California. The official version goes like this: Djokovic played Indian Wells, aggravated his right shoulder, made a sensible call to prioritize recovery ahead of clay season, and will return at Monte Carlo in early April. Clean, logical, completely stripped of the context that makes this withdrawal genuinely significant. Here is the fuller version. A 38-year-old man who has not won a Grand Slam since September 2023 arrived at Indian Wells already managing a forearm injury he publicly disclosed before his first match. He wore a compression sleeve on his right arm throughout 3 consecutive 3-set battles. He told Tennis Channel directly, before facing Draper, that serving was painful. After any rest period longer than 5 minutes, that is not a player managing minor discomfort. That is a player competing through a structural physical problem significant enough to affect his most important weapon on his second competitive appearance of an entire calendar year. The mainstream coverage of Djokovic's Indian Wells campaign celebrated his 4th-round appearance as a milestone, his deepest run at the event since 2017, 9 years removed from his last title there in 2016. That framing is technically accurate and analytically useless. What the milestone framing deliberately obscures is that Djokovic dropped sets in both his opening matches. Kamil Meisterzak, ranked well outside the top 30, pushed him to 3 sets. Alexander Kovacevic, ranked similarly, did the same. These are not the kind of results a healthy, fully operational Djokovic produces against that level of opposition. These are the results of a player grinding through physical limitation on a fast, hard court surface that punishes any mechanical inefficiency in the serve. The exact shot his forearm was struggling to produce consistently. Then came Jack Draper, the reigning Indian Wells champion, defending his title physically fresh and tactically sharp. Djokovic won the first set 6-4, lost the second 4-6, and pushed the third to a tiebreak that ended 7-6-5 in Draper's favor. At some point during that deciding set, after winning a spectacular 26-shot rally, Djokovic collapsed to the court in exhaustion. He recovered, broke back when Draper served for the match, and forced the tiebreak, but the effort had visibly drained him. He described it himself afterward, "I completely ran out of gas." That is a direct quote from a man who has played through knee surgery, hamstring tears, and elbow operations across a career spanning more than 2 decades. Running out of gas against a 23-year-old defending champion in the third set of an Indian Wells round of 16 match is not a sign of a player in command of his physical situation. It is a data point. The withdrawal from Miami 3 days later was the confirmation of what that data point already indicated. To frame the Miami withdrawal purely as an injury story is to ignore the 6 weeks that preceded Indian Wells entirely. Djokovic did not play a single competitive match between February 1st and his first round appearance at the BNP Paribas Open in early March. 6 weeks of silence following the Australian Open final. No Dubai, no Doha, no Qatar. The entire Middle East swing passed without him. On February 1st at Rod Laver Arena, Carlos Alcaraz defeated Djokovic 2-6, 6-2, 6-3, 7-5 in 3 hours and 2 minutes to claim his first Australian Open title and complete the career Grand Slam at 22 years old, the youngest man in the Open era to achieve it. The scoreline tells one story. The context tells a far more uncomfortable one. Djokovic began that final brilliantly, winning the first set 6-2 in what looked like the performance of a man who had solved the Alcaraz puzzle. Then the match turned completely. His unforced error count reached 46 by the final point. He held a perfect 10-0 record in Australian Open finals entering that night, a record built across 18 years of dominance at Melbourne Park. Alcaraz broke it in 4 sets. More significantly, the Melbourne loss extended Djokovic's Grand Slam final losing streak to 3 consecutive defeats, all to Alcaraz. Combined with their 2025 US Open semifinal result, it became 4 consecutive losses to the Spaniard across all tournaments since Djokovic's gold medal victory at the 2024 Paris Olympics. Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner have now accumulated the past 9 Grand Slam titles between them, dating back to Djokovic's last major triumph at the 2023 US Open. That is a drought spanning over 2 full years at the sport's highest level for the man who holds the all-time record with 24 Grand Slam titles. His runner-up speech in Melbourne deserves more serious attention than it received. I must be very honest and say I didn't think I would be standing in the closing ceremony of a Grand Slam once again, Djokovic told the Rod Laver Arena crowd. God knows what happens tomorrow, let alone in 6 months or 12 months. It has been a great ride. That language was not the polished, diplomatic graciousness of a champion delivering a rehearsed concession speech. It was a 38-year-old athlete in a genuinely uncertain moment, speaking without the filter that competitive certainty normally provides. That speech disappeared beneath Alcaraz's celebration content within 48 hours. The tennis media moved on. It should not have. Here is where the structural damage becomes quantifiable in a way that no optimistic clay season narrative can easily dismiss. By forfeiting his Miami appearance, Djokovic loses the 650 ranking points he earned by reaching last year's final, where he lost to Jakub Menchik in what was his deepest run at the event since his dominant period of Miami titles in 2007, 2011, 2012, 2014, 2015, and 2016. Combined with Alexander Zverev's minimal points defense obligations from his 2025 round of 16 exit, the ATP rankings update on March 30th will push Djokovic outside the top 3, a significant positional shift that carries real consequences beyond the symbolic. Seedings at Grand Slams are determined by rankings. A player outside the top 4 at Roland Garros faces a realistic probability of meeting the top seeds before the quarterfinals. For Djokovic, whose clay court game remains arguably the strongest dimension of his current arsenal, arriving at the French Open without the seeding protection his ranking previously guaranteed is a genuine competitive disadvantage, not a minor administrative inconvenience. His projected return at Monte Carlo in early April gives him, at best, 2 clay court tournaments before Roland Garros begins. 2 events to rebuild match sharpness, test the shoulder under competitive conditions, and establish the physical rhythm that deep Grand Slam runs require. That is an extremely compressed preparation window for a 38-year-old managing an injury that forced him out of a Masters 1000 event entirely. At what point does managing his body intelligently become the accepted framing for a career in its final movement? That question sounds harsh. It is also the only honest question worth asking about Novak Djokovic's 2026 season after everything the evidence has shown across the past 7 weeks. A Grand Slam final loss that extended a winless streak at majors beyond 2 years, 6 weeks away from competition. A return to the tour visibly hampered by a forearm injury. 3-set battles against opponents ranked outside the top 50. Physical exhaustion against a player a decade and a half his junior. A Miami withdrawal that costs 650 ranking points and pushes him outside the top 3. None of this means Djokovic cannot win Roland Garros. His clay court record across his career remains extraordinary, and the French Open surface genuinely favors his defensive baseline construction and exceptional movement in ways that hard courts at this stage no longer consistently do. He beat Jannik Sinner, the double defending Australian Open champion, in 5 sets in the Melbourne semi-finals to reach that final. The competitive engine is not gone. What has changed is the margin. The physical buffer that once allowed Djokovic to absorb punishment across 2 weeks of Grand Slam tennis and still produce his best in the final has been measurably reduced. The shoulder that ends his Miami campaign is not the first significant physical setback of recent years. Knee surgery, hamstring problems, and elbow issues have punctuated his later career with increasing frequency. Each recovery has been followed by a return that demonstrated his extraordinary resilience. The pattern is real, so is the accumulation. Djokovic told reporters after the Australian Open, "I'm gonna keep pushing and see if I get another chance." That statement carries a weight it would not have carried 3 years ago. In 2023, it would have sounded like standard champion motivation. In March 2026, it sounds like a man who genuinely does not know how many more chances remain, and is determined to make each one count regardless of the physical cost. The tennis establishment's response to all of this has been to project clay season optimism, reference his Monte Carlo return, and pivot toward the French Open narrative as if the events of the past 7 weeks represent nothing more than routine injury management for a veteran competitor. That framing is not wrong, it is simply incomplete in ways that matter enormously for anyone trying to understand what is actually happening to the greatest player this sport has ever produced. The immediate competitive consequence of Djokovic's absence is a Miami Open draw cracked wide open at the top. Carlos Alcaraz arriving in Florida. Off his Australian Open triumph, and with full fitness, becomes the overwhelming favorite in a field suddenly missing its most psychologically imposing presence. Jannik Sinner, despite his Australian Open semi-final exit to Djokovic, remains a formidable contender. The draw without its most decorated entry is genuinely more navigable for every player inside the top 10. For the tournament itself, losing a 6-time champion and 8-time finalist, figures that tie Djokovic with Andre Agassi for the most decorated men's singles record in Miami Open history, is a commercial and competitive blow that no replacement draw entry can offset. Hard Rock Stadium will be full. The tennis will be excellent. The absence at the center of it will be noticeable to anyone who has watched this tournament long enough to understand what Djokovic's presence has meant to it across nearly 2 decades. If this breakdown challenged the comfortable narrative surrounding Djokovic's withdrawal and forced you to look at the full picture, the AO defeat, the Indian Wells struggle, the ranking mathematics, and the genuine uncertainty embedded in his own public statements, then this channel is where you need to be for every major tennis story that follows. Hit subscribe right now. Turn on notifications because the algorithm will not reliably surface this kind of forensic analysis in your feed. Drop your honest prediction for Djokovic's Roland Garros campaign in the comments, because that tournament is now the defining moment of his entire 2026 season, and the conversation around it starts here. The sanitized version of events is everywhere. The complete version lives on this channel. See you at Monte Carlo.